Would anyone like to ask questions?
What's the significance that you are seeing? Because we are just about going into large-scale LVRT standard enforcement all over India. What's the significance of your study? What's your recommendation to the government?
The recommendation is, if we are, so I am not commenting here in the context of Indian LVRT requirement, because Indian LVRT requirement requires active power priority. So I am yet to understand, trying to understand why active power requirement. There might be some reasons behind it, but generally in the large systems it is reactive power priority. But in some cases, for whatever is the reason, when we go for this LVRT, active power based LVRT requirement, the intention is that we have more active power injection into the grid during this LVRT requirement. But in some particular cases, which I try to highlight here, that it so happens that in active power based LVRT, we are going to have less active power injection into the grid compared to the reactive power priority based LVRT. So what that will actually result in aggregate, if we have higher penetration, it can result in significant shortfall of active power generation and may impact the frequency of the grid. We are still into the study, but I don't think we can generalize it. It depends on the condition of the connection point of the wind turbine, how strong or weak the grid is at that connection, and it also depends on the level of the voltage dip. If the voltage dip is more, then it might be a different priority. If the voltage dip is less, so I think it cannot be generalized.
There's one over there.
Julian Langstettler from FGH in Germany. Thank you for your interesting presentation. With respect to the voltage control, so let's say reactive current priority, what kind of characteristic did you assume? Because you perform some voltage dips, but it's depending on the voltage dip what kind of reactive current is injected then. So was it always maximum reactive current, or was there a characteristic?
In case of reactive power priority, we followed that from 90% to 50% voltage dip, we have linear, that 2% this linear factor, 2% group. About 50%, it is 1 per unit reactive current. That is for reactive power priority LVRT. While as for active power priority, what we did is we maintained active current injection at 1 per unit, and then it is by default following the active power injection in proportion to the voltage retained at the terminal of the wind turbine.
Any other question?
Is it important that the active power, whether it is available or not, in some reactive power is available anyway, but reactive power, active power is only available you have wind or sun, and yeah.
It depends on the system. As I said, some countries, especially these small island countries, have frequency issue more of a concern because of the smaller size of the system. So they would prefer to have more active power injection into the grid. While as you have, if you see the other side, reactive power priority based LVRT, you also have to see if we inject a less reactive power into the grid, the voltage is going to be to recover, it's going to take more time to recover, and the voltage dip is going to be more. And it may so happen in some cases, if we don't follow the reactive current priority LVRT, the voltage might be low to the extent where wind turbines can actually be allowed to have disconnection from the grid, and that can be again can lead to the instability issues in the system.
In that case, I'd request our co-chair to say a few words. Helge, you have one question. Okay, one question there.
I just wanted to put a question to the panelists. See, if we see the discussion which goes on, any change in the grid code has a regulatory lag, or those who make standards. For example, take LVRT. 2010, the German operators visited us from Amprion and said that you better get it as quickly as possible, otherwise we are in trouble, you will be in trouble. And we initiated. But it took 5 to 6 years to get it in the code or in the standard, and yet we do not know whether there is a compliance, there is a testing, then we have old cases. What is new today will become old tomorrow. So the critical mass gets connected, and that critical mass would oppose and frustrate the change. So at the end, the grid continues to suffer with the deficiencies because we don't get it, we are not able to set right. So what is your suggestion? How do we take it forward? For example, in the grid code, should we talk of droop characteristics, get it introduced? If it's a very much forward-looking, then also it doesn't get inside the grid code. So how do you take care of this dilemma? Would we be always in the lagging mode and live with the deficiencies, or how do we give it a feed forward?
If I could pick up this one, I think there is a big difference between large and complex and small and agile. In a small country like Ireland, it is possible to have an idea and maybe find an idea somewhere else and implement it in a couple of years. For continental Europe, relating to my own talk, we are probably 10 years to coordinate and to agree a process forward with 34 countries, many heads with many opinions, many organizations, and getting them all to agree is very, very difficult. I remember in 2012 we had an audience of 200 making comments to our draft code, and it will be 2019 before it starts to bite. So India, that's at least a single synchronous area, should be in a middle position, in my view, in terms of getting forward. And I would say 5 years is a pretty good performance anyway for the size of the country. But picking things up and moving forward, I think, is challenging. And if I could just add, carry on the other aspects where you asked me, or
let's just answer this, and then you could have a few more words. The other thing is that India is, yes, one synchronous region, but it's got as many states as the number of countries in Europe. So, and you have renewable rich states are 8 of them, and so it's not such an easy thing in India also. Yeah, I'd like.
Yeah, you're right in stressing the implementation time. What you can do is to request the ability of inverters to follow, let's say, a broad range of FRT possibilities, and then it is only a software change, whether it is active or power, a reactive power injection, or what is a droop, and so on and so on. That can be changed later on, but when the hardware is not able to do so, then it's not so easy to change anything.
I just have a follow-up on this. So who initiates normally in different countries? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the grid utilities, or the regulator, or those who make standard, or only the last operator? Who initiates such changes? And when should he initiate it?
Yeah, the standard committees normally. And the standard committees, everyone can contribute, who is able to discuss on the level, on the scientist level. And normally manufacturers contribute, operators, utilities. They are meeting in the standard committees and discuss. And at last, that is the way standards are generated.
If I could just add there that in Europe now, standards are still subject to the codes themselves. So standards have to follow rather than lead on the codes as driven by European Commission. And to answer the questions in how it is now done in Europe, then Commission starts a program, European Commission, so the politicians handing it over to the regulators, who then provides a framework, who then hands it over to the transmission system operators, who writes the code and then interact with everybody. And when there is a code available, then yes, the standards have to be updated to align to that. For the lower down you are, the more essential and the more standards-driven things are. The larger your system, the more pure grid code you are dealing with. At domestic level, standards are totally dominant in terms of dealing with issues, and in between, in a sort of medium voltage, there is a sort of a sharing of activity.
Carry on with your comments, please.
Okay, so here we've seen a lot of the complexities in terms of delivering standards and and grid codes and the time it takes. In Europe, we use the same wording for designing markets and for designing system operation as well, codes, although here we are predominantly talking about connection elements. The compliance issues which has been touched on in this session, to me, is very interesting. And yes, we have had a long focus on a single wind turbine and how to prove that a single wind turbine is capable of dealing with everything, particularly in fault right-through, but also in probably 20 other aspects. When it comes to overall system voltage support and overall frequency support, it is more complex to get it simplified and to get it into the lab and out of the site. And I've been compliance manager for 10 years, looking after about 50 to 80 gigawatts of plants, and had a large team to do all of that to ensure that we had compliance. High cost on the utility in GB to deal with it, but we believe that that's worthwhile. But handing it to test laboratories, to me, is fine for a single item. For a bigger overall controller is complicated still, and the jury is out in whether they will succeed in picking up things from a single to wind farm. And the standards have moved in that direction, and that has taken that area on, and hopefully we will make progress such that there is less costly activity on site. When it comes to high current injection, we had an excellent presentation on high current injection, and I remember in 2011-12 I proposed fault current requirement in Europe in 10 milliseconds, and I was laughed out of court. We had to withdraw it because of the political pressure of the manufacturers and others. I still believe that it was needed, but it's only now that we are seeing it, and it will also be introduced across the patch in a number of countries now. So it's good to see that progress is being made. In terms of retrospectivity that we were talking about in terms of compliance going back from Type 1 and Type 2, very, very challenging indeed. And luckily, most places are escaping from having a weak part, but a weak part that is relatively modest. It looks like Tamil Nadu is the exception to that and may need to have deliberate action on it. And good luck in terms of finding out who pays for it, because the bill is big of going back and sorting things out retrospectively. So the lesson to me in future is be progressive, look far forward, analyze things 15 years ahead, and have something that is appropriate for where you are likely to be in your scenarios 15 years ahead in terms of code requirements. When it comes to active versus reactive power priority, then to me, the small systems, so a synchronous area of about 5 gigawatt, like Ireland, active is dominant issue to manage for the system operator. When it comes to very large systems like India, alongside continental Europe, to me, voltage is sensible to have the lead element. In between, at Great Britain, where I was, we have gone for limited priority to active power, to real power, and voltage to make use of the rest of the capability. But I think that's a sort of the break point of size of system when it makes sense to give priority to real power. And also, I believe that single synchronous area is what you're looking at, and India being a single synchronous area, the issue is, I think, is a synchronous area one for real power rather than a local one. Yes, there are obviously short-term impacts in terms of transmission, transfers, large transfers associated with it, but by and large, they are mostly manageable in a well-designed transmission system. So, as a whole, I think we've had a very interesting set of diverse contributions, and I'll hand over to the chairman to say the final words.
I won't take much time. I think we had a lot of knowledge dissemination from all the speakers, as well as interaction with the audience. I think that's all. Thank you all, and let's close this session.